The billionaire CEO had exactly 3 minutes to decide who mattered more: the woman who gave him his empire, or the little boy standing in front of him, holding the invention that could destroy everything he built. And the part that no one in that crowded ballroom knew yet was this: the child everyone was accusing of stealing from Julian Arlen's company was the same child Julian had spent 13 years believing he never had. The boy was standing only 20 feet away. The truth was standing right beside him, and Julian had no idea. The Arlen Foundation Innovation Showcase was supposed to be the easiest victory of his career. That was what everyone expected. A room full of investors, a room full of executives, a room full of people waiting to watch Julian Arlen prove once again that the Arlen name still meant something. The marble floors reflected the gold lights above them. The walls displayed inventions from young entrepreneurs who had spent years trying to earn 5 minutes in front of people who could change their lives. And in the center of it all stood a 12-year-old boy named Selah Bell. He was not dressed like the children of billionaires who usually attended events like this. No expensive watch, no designer suit, no family name printed on a foundation plaque. Just a navy jacket his mother had carefully pressed that morning, and a pair of shoes that had already survived more adventures than they were meant to. But Micah stood there like he belonged, because his mother had taught him something important. A person did not become valuable because powerful people noticed them. Powerful people noticed them because they were already valuable. Selah Bell watched from the audience, and even though she smiled when her son looked toward her, she felt the room changing. She knew that feeling. The moment before someone decided your brilliance belonged to them. The moment before people stopped asking what you created and started asking who gave you permission to create it. She had lived through it before, but she had promised herself one thing: they would never make Micah feel small. Not because the world was kind, because it wasn't, but because she had spent too many years learning what happened when a person forgot their own worth. "Micah," one of the judges said, leaning toward the display table, "can you explain how this system works?" The boy's face brightened. He loved questions. Questions meant someone was interested. Questions meant someone wanted to understand. "This device helps schools communicate during emergencies," Micah explained. "But it does it without forcing families to pay thousands of dollars for equipment they can't afford." A few people nodded. A few smiled. Then one man in a gray suit stepped forward. And Selah knew immediately. This was the moment. The moment everything changed. The man looked toward the executive standing near the back of the room. Then he looked at Micah's invention. "Interesting," he said. It was not the word he used. It was the way he said it. Like interesting meant suspicious. "Mr. Bell, who helped you develop this technology?" Micah glanced at his mother. Selah gave him a small nod. "Mostly my mom." The man's expression shifted. Not surprise, recognition. And Selah felt her stomach tighten, because she knew exactly what he had recognized. Not Micah, not the child. The work. "This design contains elements similar to technology owned by Arlen Advanced Mobility," the executive announced. The room became quiet. A moment earlier, people had been looking at Micah like he was the future. Now they were looking at him like he was a problem. Selah stood slowly. "My son did not steal anything." The executive turned toward her. "Mrs. Bell, no one is accusing him personally." But everyone heard what he did not say. Someone was accusing him. Someone was making a 12-year-old boy carry the weight of a company's suspicion. Selah walked closer. "I know exactly what you are saying." Her voice stayed calm. That was something people misunderstood about Selah. They thought quiet meant weak. They never understood that sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one who no longer needed to raise their voice to be heard. "This invention belongs to my son," she said, and he should not have to defend his intelligence because adults failed to recognize it. A few people lowered their eyes, because they knew she was right. But powerful rooms rarely moved because something was right. They moved because someone powerful decided it mattered. And then the doors opened. Julian Arlen walked in. The entire room shifted. That was what happened when someone like Julian entered. People straightened. Conversations stopped. Executives who had been confidently speaking moments before suddenly remembered who owned the building they were standing in. Julian was 42 years old, the man who transformed Arlen Advanced Mobility from a respected family company into a global technology empire. To the outside world, he had everything: money, influence, a name people recognized. But nobody saw the one thing he had never been able to buy: peace. His phone vibrated in his hand. He looked down. 3 missed calls. The hospice nurse. His mother. Again. Julian closed his eyes for half a second. Vivian Arlen was dying. The woman who raised him. The woman who taught him how to negotiate before he was old enough to drive. The woman who told him that feelings were distractions and survival belonged to people who stayed focused. She had spent her entire life building the Arlen legacy. And now, at the end of it, she wanted her son beside her. Julian had promised he would come. But then he saw Selah Bell. And the world stopped. 13 years disappeared. Because some people do not leave your life completely. They leave behind a version of yourself you never got back. Selah looked almost the same, but not exactly. There were new lines around her eyes, a different strength in the way she stood, the kind of strength people gained when they survived something they never thought they could survive. Julian had spent years telling himself he was over her, but seeing her standing there proved he had only learned how to live without asking why. Then he saw the boy, Micah, and something inside him went still. Not because the child looked like him. Not exactly. It was something deeper. The way the boy held the invention. The way he studied the room. The way he listened before speaking. Julian knew those things because he had spent his whole life doing the same. One of the executives approached him quickly. "Mr. Arlen, we have a situation." Julian barely looked away from Micah. "What happened?" "This contestant appears to have submitted technology derived from proprietary Arlen research." Julian's eyes moved to the invention, then back to Selah. For 13 years he had believed one story. Selah left. Selah chose her pride over him. Selah disappeared. But the woman standing in front of him did not look like someone who walked away from something she loved. She looked like someone who had been left behind. "Who reviewed this claim?" Julian asked. The executive hesitated. "Legal is handling it." That answer bothered him. Because Julian knew his company. And he knew when people hid behind procedures because they did not want anyone looking too closely. His phone vibrated again. The hospice nurse. He ignored it. And that was the first choice. The first moment where the old Julian would have walked away. The old Julian would have gone to his mother. He would have protected the family name. He would have trusted the people around him. But something about the boy standing there made him stop. "Bring me the original submission files," Julian said. The executive frowned. "Now?" "Yes. But your mother." Julian looked at him. And for the first time, everyone in that room saw something different. Not the billionaire. Not the CEO. Just a man who had realized he might have spent 13 years believing a lie. I said now. The files arrived 20 minutes later. And when Julian opened them, he saw something that made his hands go cold. The original engineering sequence. The design structure. The problem-solving approach. It was impossible. Because he had seen it before. Years ago. Late nights. Empty offices. A woman laughing across a desk while they argued about whether technology should serve corporations or communities. Selah. The woman he lost. The woman who created something with him before his life became an empire. Julian stared at the screen, then slowly looked toward her. Selah noticed, and for a second, neither of them spoke. Because sometimes, the heart recognizes something long before the mind is ready to accept it. And Julian was about to discover that the biggest betrayal of his life was not that someone left him. It was that someone made sure he never knew who stayed. And somewhere inside the Arlen family estate, hidden among old documents nobody thought mattered anymore, was a letter Selah Bell had written 13 years earlier. A letter Julian was never supposed to find, but he was about to. Julian Arlen had built his entire life around one principle: never make a decision based on emotion. Emotion made people hesitate. Emotion made people vulnerable. Emotion made powerful people lose everything they worked for. That was what he had been taught. And for most of his life, he believed it. But standing in the middle of the Arlen Foundation Innovation Showcase, looking at a 12-year-old boy who carried pieces of a past Julian thought was buried forever, he realized something painful. Sometimes emotion was not the thing that clouded judgment. Sometimes emotion was the only thing telling you that something was wrong. Julian stared at the engineering files on the tablet in his hand. The submission history, the design notes, the development timeline. Everything looked legitimate. Too legitimate. That was what bothered him. Because the people who built the system were not strangers. He knew these patterns. He knew this approach. He knew the mind behind it. Years ago, before Arlen Advanced Mobility became a global name, before the glass towers and billion-dollar contracts, before people whispered his name like it belonged in the same sentence as the most powerful executives in the world, there was a small office on the 7th floor of the old Arlen building. A room with broken air conditioning, a coffee machine that never worked properly, and a woman who always stole the last biscuit from his desk because she claimed engineers needed sugar to think. Selah. She used to laugh when he complained. "You own half this building," she would say. "You can afford another box." And Julian would pretend to be annoyed. But secretly, he loved that she treated him like a normal man. Not an inheritance. Not a surname. Not a future CEO. Just Julian. The person underneath everything everyone else expected him to be. He had forgotten what that felt like. Until now. "Mr. Arlen?" The voice pulled him back. The executive stood beside him, waiting. "What is your recommendation?" The man looked surprised. Usually Julian did not ask. Usually he gave instructions. "I recommend we suspend the child's submission until legal completes their investigation." The word child bothered him. Not because it was inaccurate, because it was being used as a reason to dismiss someone. Julian looked across the room. Micah was standing beside Selah. His mother had one hand resting gently on his shoulder, not controlling him, not protecting him from every difficult thing, just reminding him he was not alone. Julian remembered something. A conversation from 13 years earlier. Selah had told him she never wanted a child who believed the world owed him kindness. She wanted a child who knew his value, even when the world refused to acknowledge it. At the time, Julian thought she was talking about the future. Now he wondered if she had been talking about a future she already knew she might have to face alone. "Do not suspend the submission," Julian said. The executive blinked. "Sir, you heard me. But if there is a potential ownership issue, then we investigate ownership." Julian placed the tablet down. "We do not punish a child because adults failed to keep accurate records." The room became quiet, because everyone understood what had just happened. Julian Arlen had chosen a side, and nobody knew why. Not even him. Selah noticed. She noticed everything. That was how she had survived. She noticed when people lowered their voices before delivering bad news. She noticed when executives smiled politely while planning how to remove her from the room. She noticed when someone was pretending to care. And Julian? Julian was harder to read, because once she had known every expression on his face. The small smile he tried to hide when something amused him. The slight tension in his jaw when he was angry. The silence that meant he was hurt, but refusing to admit it. But 13 years changed people, especially when those years were spent carrying pain alone. After the showcase ended, Selah gathered Micah's materials quietly. She wanted to leave before Julian found a reason to speak to her. Not because she hated him. That would have been easier. Hate was simple. Hate allowed you to close a door. What Selah felt was much more complicated. She remembered loving him, and she remembered what it felt like when that love disappeared without explanation. Selah. She stopped. Of course. She knew he would come. Slowly she turned. Julian stood several feet away. For a moment, neither of them moved, because there were 13 years between them. 13 years of unanswered questions. 13 years of birthdays. 13 years of wondering. "You should have told me," Julian said. Selah's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. "Excuse me?" "The technology." He looked toward Micah's invention. "You should have told me you continued the work." Something inside her hardened. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. "Is that what you think happened?" Julian frowned. "I think there are things I don't understand." "No." Her voice was calm. "That is not what you think." The words landed harder because they were true. "You think I disappeared." Julian said nothing. "You think I walked away." Still nothing. "You think I took everything we built together and left you behind." His silence answered for him. Selah looked down for a moment, not because she was weak, because she was trying to control the emotions that had lived inside her for years. "When did you decide that was easier to believe?" Julian looked away. And that hurt more than anger would have, because Selah had spent 13 years imagining this moment. She imagined screaming. She imagined asking why he never searched harder. She imagined telling him every painful detail. But standing there, she realized something. She did not need him to understand her pain before she acknowledged it herself. "I did not leave because I stopped loving you," she said. Julian looked back at her, and something in his expression shifted. "You don't know what I was told." "No," Selah answered. "I know what happened." The difference between those two things stayed between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. Micah quietly watched them from nearby. Children always noticed more than adults believed, especially children who grew up learning how to read silence. "Mom?" Selah turned immediately. "Yes? Are we leaving?" She looked at her son, then at Julian. And Julian noticed something. The boy was not waiting for him. He was not looking at him like he needed something. He was looking at Selah, because she was his safe place. Julian felt something unexpected, not jealousy, something closer to grief, because there had been 12 years of moments he never got. First words, first steps, first day of school, first time Micah built something and looked for someone to be proud. Those moments belonged to Selah, and Julian had not even known they existed. "I should go," Selah said. Julian wanted to stop her. He wanted to ask 100 questions. "Why did you leave? Why didn't you call? Why did you let me believe you were gone?" But another question rose above all the others, the one he was afraid to ask. "Selah?" She paused. "What?" Julian looked at Micah, then back at her. The resemblance was not obvious enough for anyone else to see, but he felt something. A strange familiarity, a connection he could not explain. "Is Micah's father?" He stopped, because saying the question out loud made it real. Selah's face changed. Not fear, not guilt, pain. The kind of pain that came from being forced to revisit something you buried because surviving required you to stop touching the wound. Before she could answer, Julian's phone rang. Again. The hospice nurse. This time, he answered. "Mr. Arlen?" The voice on the other end was gentle. Too gentle. And Julian knew before she said anything. "Your mother has asked for you several times." His eyes closed. "I'm coming." He ended the call. Selah watched him. For one brief moment, she saw the man she used to love. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just a son who was running out of time. And despite everything between them, she could not ignore that. "She's dying," Selah whispered. Julian nodded. "I know." The silence that followed was different, because for the first time in 13 years, they were standing in the same moment. Both carrying loss. Both carrying questions. Both wondering if the truth was something that could still repair what had already been broken. Then Julian looked at Micah again. And the question he had almost asked stayed in his mind. Because deep down, he already knew. He just needed proof. That night, Julian returned to the Arlen family estate, the place that had shaped him. The place where every hallway carried memories. His mother's portrait hung above the staircase. A reminder of everything she built, everything she protected, everything she sacrificed. Julian walked into his childhood study. He had not entered the room in years. Too many memories lived there. Too many expectations. On the desk sat an old wooden box. He almost ignored it. Almost. Then he noticed something. A name written across the top. Selah Bell. Julian froze. Because some things are not lost. They are hidden. Waiting for the right person to finally be ready to find them. And inside that box was the truth his entire life had been built around avoiding. Julian Arlen stood in the doorway of the old study for almost a full minute. He did not move. He did not breathe deeply. He did not reach for the box. Because there are moments in life when your instincts tell you to run from the truth before your mind has even understood why. This was one of those moments. The wooden box sat on the desk exactly where someone had placed it. Not hidden in a wall, not buried beneath years of forgotten belongings. Placed, waiting, and written across the top in handwriting Julian knew immediately were two words that made his entire body go still. Selah Bell. He had spent 13 years believing he knew how their story ended. He believed she left. He believed she made a choice. He believed the woman who once promised to build a future with him had decided she could build one better without him. But now her name was sitting inside the house where she had supposedly never belonged. Inside the room where his family kept the things they wanted remembered. And the question that came next was one Julian was afraid to answer. Why? Why had his mother kept something that belonged to Selah? Slowly, he walked toward the desk. The room felt different now. The same shelves, the same leather chair, the same framed photographs of Arlen family milestones. But suddenly, every object felt like it was part of a story he had only heard one side of. Julian opened the box. Inside were documents, old project notes, printed emails, a photograph, and beneath everything else, an envelope. His fingers stopped before touching it, because the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. His name, not typed, written, by her, Julian. The room became silent, a silence so deep he could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, 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 like time itself was reminding him how much of it had been stolen. He picked up the envelope. It had never been opened. Not by him. Not by anyone who mattered. For 13 years, the words inside had been waiting for someone to finally hear them. Julian sat down slowly, and for the first time in years, The billionaire CEO who could negotiate billion-dollar contracts with a calm face felt completely powerless because money could solve problems, but it could not rewrite moments. It could not give him back the nights he missed. It could not return the years between a father and a son who never knew each other. And it could not erase the possibility that the woman he blamed had been telling the truth all along. He opened the envelope. The paper inside was slightly worn, like it had been held, like someone had once hoped it would reach him. The first line nearly broke him. "Julian, I don't know if you will ever read this, but I need you to know that I tried." He stopped, closed his eyes, then continued. "I tried to find you. I tried to believe there was still a way for us to talk without anger standing between us, but every door I reached closed before I could knock." Julian's grip tightened around the paper, because suddenly, memories he had buried began returning. The weeks after Selah disappeared, the calls that went unanswered, the messages that never received replies, the way his mother had told him, "She made her decision, Julian. You cannot force someone to stay." At the time, he believed those words were painful because they were true. Now they felt painful because they might have been carefully chosen. He kept reading. "I found out I was pregnant after everything happened." Julian stopped breathing. The words blurred. He read them again, then again. Because sometimes the heart refuses to accept something even when the eyes have already seen it. Pregnant. The word existed. The sentence existed. The truth existed. And suddenly, the child standing in that ballroom was no longer just a talented boy with a familiar design. He was a possibility. A life Julian never knew existed. His son. Julian stood so quickly the chair moved backward. "No." The word came out quietly. Not because he did not believe it, because he did. And that terrified him. He continued reading. "I wanted you to know. I wanted our child to know you. Whatever happened between us, I never wanted him to grow up believing he was unwanted by his father." Julian looked away. His eyes burned, because that sentence hurt more than anger would have. Selah had not kept Micah from him out of revenge. She had not used him as a weapon. She had been trying to protect a child from feeling rejected. The exact thing Julian had spent his own childhood fighting against. He remembered being young, sitting at the dinner table in that same house, watching his mother talk about business decisions, investments, and reputation. Always reputation. Always what people would think. He remembered wondering if she loved him or if she loved the future she imagined for him. And now he had to face the possibility that the woman who raised him had created the same wound for someone else. A knock interrupted him. Julian quickly folded the letter. "Come in." The door opened. Tessa Monroe stood there. She was older than she had been when she worked in the company archives, but she carried herself with the same careful honesty. The kind of honesty that came from someone who had spent too long knowing something they should have said. "I thought I would find you here." Julian looked at her. "How long have you known?" Tessa lowered her eyes. And that was answer enough. "How long?" Her voice was quiet. "Not everything." Julian stood. "I did not ask if you knew everything." Tessa swallowed. "I found the files years ago." The anger that crossed Julian's face was immediate, but underneath it was something worse. Pain. "You knew?" "I suspected." "You suspected Selah was telling the truth?" "I suspected something happened that did not match the story we were given." Julian looked toward the letter. "And you said nothing." Tessa's expression broke slightly. "I was afraid." The answer was honest, but honesty did not make it less painful. Afraid of what? Losing everything. Julian laughed once. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. My entire life was changed because people were afraid of losing things. Tessa looked down. My job, my position, my comfort. She nodded. Yes. A long silence passed. Then she said the thing Julian needed to hear. But Selah lost much more. That sentence stayed, because it was true. Selah lost the relationship. She lost the future she imagined. She lost the chance to let her child know his father. And she lost the credit for work that helped build the very company now accusing her son. Julian looked back at the letter. Why did my mother keep this? Tessa hesitated, and that hesitation told him there was more. There were things about Julian Arlen that people outside the family never understood. Julian's jaw tightened. Do not protect her. I am not. Tessa stepped closer. I am telling you the truth. Your mother believed she was protecting the Arlen legacy. Julian looked at her. She destroyed people to protect a name. Tessa did not argue, because she knew. She believed the company was fragile. She believed one wrong decision could ruin everything your grandfather built. Julian stared at the envelope. And what about me? Tessa's eyes softened. That was the part she got wrong. For years, Julian had believed his mother's greatest lesson was strength. Now he wondered if it had actually been fear. Fear disguised as responsibility. Fear disguised as love. Fear disguised as protection. His phone rang. Again. The hospice. This time, Julian stared at the screen, because the person calling was the same person who had taken something from him, but also the woman who was dying. And suddenly, he did not know what he wanted. Answers? Forgiveness? An explanation? He answered, Mom. There was a pause. Then Vivian's tired voice came through. Did you find it? Julian froze. Not because she asked, because she already knew. The letter shook slightly in his hand. You knew I would find it. Silence. Then, I knew eventually you would ask the right questions. Julian closed his eyes. A different kind of anger rose. You let me hate her. Another silence. You let me believe she abandoned me. Vivian's breathing was uneven. I thought I was saving you. No. Julian looked around the room that had shaped him. The room full of memories. The room full of secrets. You were saving yourself. For the first time in his life, Julian heard his mother with no power behind her voice. No authority. No control. Just an old woman who knew time was almost gone. I made mistakes. Julian looked at the letter, at Selah's words, at the years he could never recover. Yes, he whispered, you did. And for once, he did not make the mistake of pretending everything was fine. The next morning, Julian returned to Selah. Not as a CEO, not as the owner of the company accusing her, not as the man who thought he understood their past. He returned as someone who finally knew he had been wrong. Selah opened the door, and the moment she saw his face, she knew. Something had changed. What happened? Julian looked at her. The woman who had carried the truth alone. The woman who had raised his son. The woman he had lost because someone else decided they knew better. I found your letter. Selah went still, not shocked, not confused, just tired. Because some wounds do not reopen. They simply remind you they never fully closed. My letter? Julian nodded. The one you wrote to me. Her eyes moved away. For a second, she looked younger. Like the woman who had once believed love would be enough. You read it? Yes. The silence between them held everything. Then Julian said the words he should have said 13 years earlier. I am sorry. Selah looked back at him. And this time, she did not look away. Not because forgiveness had arrived, but because for the first time, the truth had. Selah Bell had imagined this moment more times than she wanted to admit. Not this exact moment. Not Julian standing on the other side of her door with exhaustion written across his face and an apology he seemed unsure he deserved to say. But the moment when the truth finally came out. The moment when he finally understood For 13 years, she had wondered what she would do if Julian ever came back. Would she scream? Would she cry? Would she ask him why he never fought harder? Would she tell him about every night Micah had asked questions she could not answer? Would she tell him about the birthdays where she had watched other fathers lift their children into the air and wondered if Julian would have done the same? She had imagined anger. She had imagined heartbreak. She had imagined closure. But she had never imagined feeling tired. That was the emotion she felt now. Not relief, not revenge, just exhaustion. Because when someone finally confirms the truth you carried alone for years, the first feeling is not always happiness. Sometimes it is grief for the person you had to become while waiting. Julian stood quietly. He did not try to enter. He did not try to explain before she was ready. That was different. The old Julian would have filled the silence. He would have searched for the perfect words, the right argument, the reason. But the man standing there seemed to understand something. There was no speech powerful enough to return 13 years. There was a letter, Selah said softly. Julian nodded. Yes. And you found it in your family's house. Yes. She looked down. A small, painful smile crossed her face. Of course. Julian frowned. What does that mean? It means I should have known. Known what? That the truth was never lost. Her eyes lifted back to his. It was hidden. Those words stayed with him, because he finally understood the difference. Lost things were accidents. Hidden things were choices. And someone had chosen. Someone had decided Selah's voice did not matter. Someone had decided Julian's love could be controlled. Someone had decided Micah could grow up without knowing his father. Julian swallowed. I should have found you. Selah's expression softened for only a second. Then the hurt returned. Yes. That one word hurt more than anger. Because she was right. He should have. No matter what he was told, no matter what he believed, a part of him had always known something did not feel right. But believing the worst had been easier than admitting he might have lost something precious because he trusted the wrong people. I looked for you, Julian said. Selah studied him. After? He hesitated, and she noticed. That hesitation told her everything. After what? Julian looked away. After my mother told me you left. Selah closed her eyes briefly. There it was, the sentence that explained everything. Not because it made sense, because it revealed the problem. He searched after the damage was done, after someone had already convinced him she was gone by choice. How long did you look? Julian did not answer immediately. And again, she saw the truth before he spoke. A few months? Selah nodded slowly. A few months. She had spent 13 years. 13 years raising a child, building a career again, protecting Micah from feeling unwanted. And he had searched for a few months before accepting a story that made his pain easier to carry. I am not angry that you believed a lie, she said. Julian looked surprised. I am angry that you stopped looking for the truth. That sentence broke something in him, because that was the wound. Not just losing her, not just losing Micah. It was the fact that he had accepted an explanation because it allowed him to move forward, while Selah had been forced to live inside the unanswered questions. I don't know how to fix this, Julian admitted. It was the first honest thing he had said without trying to sound like someone who had control. Selah looked at him, and for a moment she saw the man she loved. Not because she forgot what happened, because she remembered who he was before everything broke. You can't fix 13 years, Julian. He nodded. I know. You can't give Micah back the moments he missed. I know. You can't make me forget that I had to do everything alone. His voice became quiet. I know. That was when something changed. Because Selah expected excuses. She expected explanations. She expected him to defend himself, but he did not, and that made it harder, because anger was easier when someone refused to understand. Inside the house, Micah sat at the kitchen table finishing his homework. He had heard enough to know something important had happened. Children did not need every detail. They understood emotions. They understood when adults carried heavy things. When Selah walked back inside, Micah looked up. "Is he my father?" The question landed gently, but it carried years of weight. Selah stopped. She had always known this moment would come. She had always hoped she would have more time, more preparation, a perfect explanation. But life rarely gave people perfect moments. It gave them real ones. "Yes," she said. Micah looked down, then back up. "Does he know?" Selah nodded. "Yes." The boy was quiet, not crying, not smiling, just thinking. Because 12-year-old children are often more emotionally intelligent than adults give them credit for. After a moment, he asked, "Did he know before?" Selah felt her throat tighten. "No." Micah looked toward the window. "And now he does." "Yes." Another silence. Then, "Is he going to leave?" Selah felt that question deeper than any accusation Julian could have made, because that was the fear. Not that Julian would not love Micah, that he would love him temporarily, that he would appear now that the truth was convenient and disappear when life became complicated. Selah knelt beside her son. "I don't know." It was the most honest answer she could give. Micah nodded, and somehow that honesty seemed to matter. The next morning, Julian arrived at Arlen Advanced Mobility before sunrise. He had not slept, not because he was working, because he was remembering. Every conversation with Selah, every moment he dismissed, every time he believed his mother's version because it came from someone he trusted. He walked into the executive boardroom, the same room where decisions had been made about people who were never invited to defend themselves. The same room where Selah's work had likely been discussed as an asset instead of a creation. The board members looked surprised. Julian rarely called meetings this early. "We have a situation," one executive said. Julian sat at the head of the table. "No." The room quieted. "We have had a situation for 13 years. Nobody spoke. Julian placed the old project files on the table. This technology was created by Selah Bell. A few executives exchanged looks. "Mr. Arlen." "No." His voice was calm, but everyone heard the finality. "You are going to listen." He opened the file. The original concepts, the early designs, the notes written in Selah's handwriting, proof that existed before the company had claimed ownership. This company built a legacy on work that was never properly credited. The board members shifted. One of them leaned forward. "Are you suggesting we made an error?" Julian looked at him. "I am suggesting we benefited from one." The room became silent, because admitting an error was corporate language. Accepting responsibility was something else, and Julian knew exactly what responsibility required. Sacrifice. Later that afternoon, Julian returned to the hospice. His mother looked smaller than he remembered. That was the strange thing about watching powerful people become human. Time eventually humbled everyone. Vivian Arlen looked toward him. "You found the letter." Julian sat beside her. "Yes." She nodded. "I wondered when. Not if. When." That hurt too. "You knew I would find it eventually. I knew you would need to." Julian stared at her. "Need to?" Vivian looked tired. "I thought I was protecting you." "You keep saying that." "Because I believed it." Julian's expression hardened. "And what did you think you were protecting me from?" She was silent. Then she answered, "From choosing a life that would make the world judge you." Julian almost laughed. Almost. Because after everything, that was what she feared, not losing him. Not hurting Selah, not taking a father away from his child, being judged. You were afraid of what people would say. Vivian looked away. Yes. The honesty surprised him. My entire life, Julian whispered. You taught me never to be controlled by other people's opinions. Her eyes filled slightly. I know. And then you let them control you. Vivian closed her eyes, because she knew. That was the truth she had avoided. Julian left the hospice that evening carrying something heavier than anger, responsibility. Because now he understood, the letter was not the ending. It was the beginning. Finding the truth did not erase the damage. It only gave him the chance to stop causing more. And the next choice would determine everything. Not whether he was Micah's father. The truth had already answered that. The question was whether he was willing to become one. Because love was not proven by discovering what belonged to you. Love was proven by showing up for what you had already lost. And Julian Arlen had 13 years to make up for. But before he could rebuild anything with Selah, he had to face the world that benefited from breaking her. Julian Arlen had spent his entire adult life knowing exactly how to win. He knew how to enter a room and command attention without raising his voice. He knew how to negotiate with people who thought they were too powerful to be challenged. He knew how to look across a table at someone twice his age and make them understand that the future belonged to him. But standing inside the Arlen Advanced Mobility boardroom that morning, Julian realized something. Winning had always been easy when the only thing at stake was money. The difficult choices were the ones that cost you something. And this one would cost him. Because protecting Selah Bell meant admitting the company he inherited had benefited from what happened to her. It meant admitting his own family had not just hurt the woman he loved. They had built something from the consequences of her silence. The executives sitting around the table knew something had changed. They had worked with Julian long enough to recognize the difference between a CEO making a strategic decision and a man making a personal one. This was personal. Before we discuss anything else, Julian said, I want the complete history of the Guardian project reviewed. A board member frowned. The project was finalized years ago. Julian looked at him. That is exactly why we need to review it. Nobody answered. Because everyone in that room understood what he was saying. Sometimes the oldest decisions carried the deepest problems. We need to be careful, another executive said. If we reopen old ownership claims, investors may react negatively. Julian leaned back. For years, he would have understood that argument. Protect the stock price. Protect the reputation. Protect the image. But now he thought about Selah standing in that ballroom. He thought about Micah being accused before anyone even asked him his name. He thought about a woman who had lost credit for her work and still taught her son to create. Then investors will have to react to the truth. The room went quiet. Because Julian Arlen had never been known as someone who sacrificed the company's image. He had built the company's image. But the man sitting there now understood something his younger self never did. A reputation built on hiding the truth was not a legacy. It was a performance. Across the city, Selah Bell sat at her kitchen table watching Micah work. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. An empty house felt lonely. A quiet house felt like a place where people were thinking. Micah had spent the last hour drawing designs in his notebook. That was what he did when something bothered him. Some children talked. Micah built things. Selah smiled sadly as she watched him. He had Julian's focus. That was the hardest part. Not the eyes. Not the mannerisms. The focus. The way he disappeared into a problem until he found an answer. She used to love that about Julian. Before she learned that a person could be brilliant and still fail you. Mom? She looked up. Yes? Do you hate him? The question surprised her. Not because she had never thought it. Because she knew Micah was asking something deeper. Children did not always ask what they meant. No. Micah looked at his drawing. Then why didn't you tell me about him? Selah took a moment. Because this was the part she struggled with. How do you explain adult pain to a child without making them carry it? I wanted to tell you. Then why didn't you? She looked at him, and she decided he was old enough for honesty. Because I was scared. Micah looked surprised. His mother was many things. Strong, patient, determined, but scared? That was not a word he often associated with her. Of him? Selah shook her head. No. She looked toward the window. Of being wrong again. Micah was quiet. I thought your father chose a life without us. She swallowed. And I did not want you growing up waiting for someone who might never come. Micah considered that. Then he asked the question Selah knew would eventually come. Do you think he would have stayed? The answer was complicated, because she had spent years protecting Micah from disappointment. But she also knew children deserved truth. I don't know, Micah nodded. And somehow, that answer seemed to matter. Because Selah was not pretending. She was not making promises she could not keep. She was letting him understand that some things were uncertain. And uncertainty was not the same as hopelessness. Julian's first real conversation with Micah happened 2 days later. Not in a boardroom, not at an event, not surrounded by people who could judge the moment. Just a park, a simple place, which felt strangely appropriate because Julian had spent years surrounded by impressive things, tall buildings, private offices, luxury homes. And yet the most important conversation of his life happened sitting on a wooden bench while a child kicked small rocks along a path. Micah sat beside him. Not close, not far, exactly where a child sits when he is trying to decide whether someone is safe. Julian respected that. I don't know if I'm supposed to call you anything, Micah said. Julian looked at him. What do you mean? Dad. The word hung between them. Julian felt the weight of it, because he had wanted this moment. But wanting something and being ready for it were different things. You don't have to call me anything you're not comfortable with. Micah nodded. That's what my mom said. Julian smiled slightly. She usually gives good advice. Micah looked at him. Do you think she hates you? Julian looked down. No. Why? Because if she hated me, she probably would have made sure you hated me too. Micah thought about that. She didn't. No. Julian looked across the park. She never did. That was something he would always respect about Selah. Even when she believed he had abandoned her, she never poisoned their child against him. She protected Micah from carrying an adult wound. That was love. Real love. The kind Julian was only beginning to understand. I made something, Micah said. Julian looked at him. What? Micah pulled out a small notebook. Inside were drawings, ideas, improvements, questions. Julian recognized the creativity immediately. You think about problems differently. Micah shrugged. My mom says problems are just questions nobody answered yet. Julian smiled. That sounds like her. Micah studied him. Did you love my mom? Julian looked at the child. The honest answer came easily. Yes. Then why did you leave? The question was simple. The answer was not. Julian did not want to give Micah an excuse. He did not want to blame everything on someone else. So he told the truth. I thought she left me. Micah frowned. But she didn't. No. Julian nodded. She didn't. A child should not have to understand that adults could lose years because they believed the wrong story. But Micah did. And maybe that was because he had grown up watching his mother survive things most people never saw. Are you going to leave now? Julian looked at him. The question hurt, because Micah was not asking about the past. He was asking about the future. No, Julian answered carefully. I can't promise I'll be perfect. Micah looked back at him. "But I can promise I will keep showing up." The boy was quiet. Then he nodded. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just the beginning of trust. And Julian understood. That was enough. That evening, Julian returned to the Arlen estate. But this time, he was not looking for answers. He was looking for evidence. Because the more he learned, the more he realized the letter was not the only thing hidden. Tessa had mentioned records, missing files, altered information. And Julian knew his family well enough to understand one thing. Secrets were rarely kept alone. He entered the old archives beneath the estate, a place most people did not even know existed. His mother had always kept important documents there. Family records, company history, things she considered too valuable to leave in ordinary storage. He searched through old files until he found a folder marked Guardian Development, Initial Ownership Review. Julian opened it. The first pages were normal. Then he saw something strange. A signature. Selah Bell. But not on a resignation form. Not on a transfer agreement. On an original creator acknowledgement. Julian read the attached note, and his heart dropped, because it was dated months before Selah disappeared. The note said, "Any future use of this technology must preserve the creator rights of Selah Bell and Julian Arlen." Julian stared at the words. Not just Selah, both of them. Their work, their dream, their future. Someone had removed her name, and someone had removed his ability to know. Then he found the final page, a handwritten note from Vivian. Short, simple, and devastating. The company cannot survive this scandal. Julian cannot be allowed to choose emotion over responsibility. Julian closed his eyes, because now he understood. His mother had not just hidden a letter, she had rewritten a story. And for 13 years, everyone had lived inside the version she created. But the truth was finally out. And this time, Julian was not going to let anyone bury it again. Because the woman they underestimated had not only survived, she had built something they could never take from her. And the child they tried to dismiss was about to become the reason an entire empire had to face what it had done. For most of his life, Julian Arlen believed family was something you inherited, a last name, a company, a legacy passed down through generations. He thought family was the people whose portraits hung on the walls of the estate, the people whose names appeared on buildings, the people who sat beside you at expensive dinners and reminded you what you were responsible for protecting. But standing in the middle of everything that was falling apart, Julian finally understood something. Family was not the name you were given. It was the people who stayed when there was nothing left to gain. And for 13 years, Selah Bell had been doing the one thing Julian's family had failed to do. She stayed. The Arlen Foundation announcement was held 3 weeks later. The same ballroom, the same marble floors, the same room where Micah had been accused before anyone bothered to understand him. But this time, the room felt different. Because this time, Julian Arlen was not walking in to protect an image. He was walking in to tell the truth. Selah stood beside Micah near the stage. She had never imagined herself standing there. Not because she lacked the talent, not because she lacked the courage, but because powerful rooms had a way of making people like her feel like they needed permission to exist. For years, she had entered spaces knowing she would have to prove twice as much, work harder, speak clearer, defend ideas that should have been recognized immediately. But today was different. Not because Julian was standing beside her, because she no longer needed anyone standing beside her to know who she was. That was the part Julian admired most. He had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his approval. Selah had spent years building a life without needing it. "Are you nervous?" Julian asked quietly. Selah looked at him. A little. He smiled. I thought you weren't afraid of anything. She smiled back. That is something people say about women when they don't understand what it costs to be brave. Julian nodded. Because he was learning. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was carrying fear and still choosing what was right. Micah stood between them holding his presentation notes. He looked from one parent to the other, still adjusting, still learning, still deciding what this new version of his life meant. Julian noticed, and he understood something important. Micah did not need him to arrive and become the father he missed. Nobody could give him those years back. Micah needed him to become the father he could trust now. That was different, and that mattered. When Julian stepped onto the stage, the room became silent. Everyone expected a corporate announcement, a carefully prepared statement, something designed by lawyers and approved by executives. Instead, Julian spoke without notes. I spent many years believing leadership meant protecting what belonged to me. He paused, but I was wrong. The audience listened. Real leadership means protecting what is right, even when admitting the truth costs you. He looked toward Selah, then toward Micah. This company benefited from the work of someone whose name was overlooked. Selah held her breath, because hearing the truth publicly was different from knowing it privately. There was a strange kind of healing that came from watching the world finally acknowledge what you carried alone. Selah Bell created technology that changed this company's future. The room shifted. Executives lowered their eyes. Investors exchanged looks. But Julian continued. And instead of recognizing her contribution, we allowed her work to exist without the credit it deserved. He did not say someone else did it. He did not hide behind his mother. He did not hide behind the board. Because accountability meant owning what happened, even when you were not the person who caused the wound. My family failed her. The words were difficult, but necessary, and I failed her. Selah looked down, because that was the apology she had needed years ago. Not an explanation, not a defense, recognition. Julian turned toward Micah, and this young man was treated as though he had something to prove. Micah looked up, but he never did. Julian smiled. His talent was always there. His worth was always there. The world just needed to catch up. For the first time, Micah smiled. Not because everyone was watching, because his father was finally seeing him. After the announcement, the family returned to the Arlen estate. Not for a business meeting, not for a negotiation, for dinner. Something simple, something Julian realized he had spent his entire life overlooking. The table was not covered with executives. There were no investors, no assistants, no people waiting for decisions, just three people trying to figure out what came next. Micah talked about his plans for improving his invention. Selah listened. Julian listened. And for a moment, everything felt ordinary. And ordinary was something Julian had never appreciated enough. After dinner, Micah found an old photograph in the hallway. He picked it up. It was Julian and Selah from years earlier, before everything broke. You looked happy. Julian looked at the picture. We were. Micah looked at Selah. Why did it change? The question was innocent, but it carried history. Selah and Julian exchanged a glance. Because children deserved honesty, but they also deserved peace. Sometimes, Selah said carefully, adults make mistakes because they believe they are protecting themselves. Micah nodded. Did you fix it? Julian looked at Selah, the woman who had once been his future, the woman who became his past, the woman who was now giving him a chance to build something new. We are trying. Micah accepted that answer, because maybe that was the greatest lesson children teach adults. Not everything needs to be perfect to be real. Months passed, and slowly, a family formed. Not a perfect one, a real one. Julian learned Micah's habits. The way he tapped his pencil when thinking. The way he became quiet when he was overwhelmed. The way he needed time before answering difficult questions. Selah watched from a distance sometimes, not because she doubted him, because she was allowing herself to believe. That was harder. Trust was not rebuilt with one apology. It was rebuilt with hundreds of small choices. Julian showed up for school events, for late-night questions, for failed experiments, for victories, for moments nobody else saw. And Micah began to understand something. His father had not arrived because he was entitled to a place in his life. He arrived because he wanted to earn one. One evening, Selah and Julian stood outside the technology center they had built together. Children moved through the building carrying inventions, ideas, dreams, possibilities. The same things they once carried before someone told them they were not important enough. You ever think about what would have happened if you found that letter sooner? Julian asked. Selah smiled softly. All the time. What do you think? She looked through the glass doors at Micah helping another child with a project. I think we would have been different people. Julian nodded. That's true. But I also think... She paused. The people we became were the people Micah needed. Julian looked at her. And that was the thing he loved most about Selah. She never pretended the pain did not happen. She simply refused to let pain be the only thing that defined the story. I am sorry for every year I missed, he said. Selah looked at him. I know. I can't change that. No. But I can be here now. A quiet moment passed. Then Selah reached for his hand. Not because everything was forgotten. Not because the past no longer mattered. Because they had finally stopped fighting the truth. And sometimes love does not return the way it left. Sometimes it comes back wiser, softer, more honest. Years later, people would talk about the Arlen family differently. They would talk about the company that changed, the foundation that reached thousands of children, the invention that started a movement. But the people who knew them personally remembered something simpler. They remembered a mother who refused to let the world convince her son he was small. They remembered a father who learned that love was not ownership. It was presence. And they remembered a child who brought two broken people back to the truth. Because sometimes the greatest thing a person can inherit is not wealth. It is the courage to choose differently. And if this story reminded you of someone who had to carry their worth quietly until the world finally caught up, share this with them. Tell us in the comments what moment resonates with you the most, and if you believe love is proven through actions, not just words. Subscribe for more stories where overlooked hearts are finally seen, because the next story may be the one someone you love needs to hear.